How does a shepherd of faith become the villain in his flock's darkest story? What leads a man entrusted with souls to violate one of his own? Can one hidden bond truly shatter an entire congregation? And at what point does forbidden longing erupt into lethal rage? In a sleepy Missouri parish, a 42-year-old congregant placed unwavering trust in his beloved pastor, never suspecting the man behind the pulpit was forging a hidden bond with his wife. One shocking night, their secret came crashing into the open, turning quiet devotion into a swirl of betrayal and bloodshed. Could this carnage have been averted if someone had recognized the signs or dared to speak out? Or was the tragedy sealed the moment desire overshadowed devotion, igniting a deadly collision between hidden passion and sacred vows? Welcome to True Crime Acts, where we look into the hidden truths behind some of the most chilling real-life events. Our mission is to uncover the stories that shock, educate, and spark change, reminding us that behind every headline is a victim, a family, and a ripple effect felt by an entire community. If you find this journey as important as we do, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell to ensure you never miss another gripping exploration into the depths of human behavior. Under the fading light of a Missouri evening, the church's facade glowed with reassurance for its faithful. The pastor, a man of seemingly impeccable character, had presided over baptisms, weddings, and prayer sessions for years. His sermons, filled with comforting words, drew people from surrounding towns, each hoping to find solace in his guidance. To many, he was a shepherd, one who guided wandering souls to higher truths. But behind his gentle smile lay a truth that would unravel everything. Unknown to his parishioners, the pastor wrestled with yearnings he should have confessed or confronted long before. An undercurrent coursed through his interactions, most visibly when he lingered after Sunday services to share jokes or anecdotes with a certain woman, the wife of a 42-year-old congregant. She was vivacious, witty, and reciprocated his friendly overtures with warmth. Those who noticed chalked it up to typical ministry concern. Pastors often took special care of individuals who might need a listening ear. Yet within that seemingly innocent dynamic, a more personal bond began to blossom. Over time, text messages turned from polite check-ins to late-night confessions of affection. Their closeness grew, overshadowing the boundaries of marriage and clerical duty. She, feeling neglected by her busy husband, found the pastor's understanding heart too tempting to resist. He, lonely despite the adoration of his entire flock, felt an exhilarating sense of being seen in a new light. Their secret might have remained hidden indefinitely, had subtle changes not crept into their everyday interactions. The woman wore an extra glow around him, and he offered special attention to her in casual gatherings. Whispers circulated. Was the pastor growing too friendly with that congregant's wife? The man himself, devoted to his faith but weighed down by personal responsibilities, hardly suspected the scale of betrayal forming behind the scenes. This precarious web, woven from desire and concealed passion, teetered on the brink of discovery. The pastor believed he could balance spiritual duties and forbidden longing, never imagining how swiftly it could all collapse. Was anyone watching close enough to save them from the chaos their hidden connection would unleash? Or did fate already chart a path leading straight to tragedy? Tension began whispering around corners. A friend of the victim noticed how the pastor's gaze followed the wife too keenly. A neighbor overheard hushed phone calls at odd hours. Rumors in small communities spread like sparks on dry grass. However, in a place where religion held deep roots, no one wanted to stir gossip against a man widely regarded as a moral compass. Curiosity lingered unspoken, overshadowed by respect for the cloth he wore. The wife, meanwhile, found herself torn between guilt and allure. The pastor was empathetic, far from the typical image of a stern church leader. He teased her gently, offered help with personal problems, and confided in her about struggles that evidently weighed on him as a spiritual caregiver. But a sense of wrongdoing gnawed at her. She knew lines had been crossed. Her husband, a devout man, remained oblivious for a time. He served the church in small tasks, arranging chairs, reading scripture on special Sundays. Trusting the pastor implicitly, he never suspected that while he organized sermon materials, the pastor and his wife traded glances that spoke volumes. But cracks form even in the most guarded illusions. It was a friend's chance observation, spotting the pastor's car parked behind a grocery store near the wife's own vehicle late at night. That began to raise eyebrows. Another time, a text notification blinked on her phone when her husband borrowed it. He only caught a glimpse of the pastor's name, prompting questions she deflected with vague answers. Each small piece of evidence could have spelled trouble if put together, but no one had quite the complete puzzle. Could a simple conversation have saved them from a later, darker confrontation? Or had the seeds of jealousy, once planted, ensured no resolution except heartbreak? The pastor's mild manner in public belied the storm forming within him. Even as he preached love and forgiveness from the pulpit, he navigated a double life that threatened his very standing, and in ways he scarcely imagined, the safety of the family he was betraying. Gossip began shaping into something tangible when a close confidant of the wife caught sight of an intimate text thread. The friend, initially stunned, confronted her gently, pleading with her to end it before it all spiraled out of hand. She wavered, aware that the walls were closing in. Meanwhile, the pastor noticed changes in the wife's demeanor. She grew jumpy, checking her phone with anxious glances. Fearing exposure, he tried to calm her. He believed their secret might still be managed through caution. If only love was enough to sustain them. If only they could keep tiptoeing around each other's obligations. But small cracks formed in the husband's trust as well. One Sunday after service, the pastor gave a sermon on fidelity and the sanctity of marriage. Congregants praised his heartfelt words, but the wife felt guilt hammered by each phrase. The husband, though touched by the message, couldn't ignore the chill that began creeping into his marriage. The sense of closeness with his wife was slipping away. If something as pure as friendship could morph into hidden passion, what would happen if the husband confronted them about the rumors swirling in the pews? The tension simmered, awaiting that spark of confirmation. Everyone involved felt it, like standing on the brink of a cliff, uncertain how deep the fall might be. Could they step back from the edge in time? Or had their silence dug a pit that no apology could fill? The question grew sharper as rumor turned into near certainty. A single suspicious phone call or slip of the tongue could unravel the entire charade. And in a man's heart, once devotion to his spouse replaced the pastor with a figure of suspicion, how violently might love twist into something far darker? The first blow landed not in physical form, but in a heated verbal exchange. The husband, now armed with enough clues to suspect the worst, had demanded the pastor meet him in a private setting. Furious and humiliated, he refused to let the pastor slip away under another pious excuse. For the pastor, shame and fear battled with a sense of wounded pride. He tried to frame his relationship with the wife as spiritual guidance, but the husband brandished texts printed from her phone, undeniable proof that their closeness went beyond platonic counsel. In that moment, illusions shattered. The pastor, once revered for counseling couples through minor disputes, now faced the rage of a man scorned. The confrontation might have ended with a shattered friendship or a parted congregation if logic prevailed. However, hidden under the pastor's mild persona was an instinct to preserve his image at any cost. The argument escalated to shouts. The pastor snapped accusations at the husband, belittling him for failing to properly care for his wife. The husband retaliated with threats to expose the affair to the entire church, vowing the pastor would never stand at the pulpit again. In that boiling tension, the seeds of violence took root. Some say they parted that night with scathing words, each man walking away furious. Others recall the husband storming off first, leaving the pastor to pace under the flickering lamp, haunted by the fear of disgrace. If the pastor had simply confessed and stepped down, would the story have ended differently? Or was the weight of scandal so threatening that a once gentle shepherd might resort to the unthinkable, crossing the line from moral failing to lethal sin? And in that final moment, as he stared at the husband's retreating figure, did he already sense that only blood could keep his secret safe? In the days that followed, rumor spread like a slow fire through the congregation. The pastor's hush-hush affair no longer remained an intimate secret. Some members expressed shock, others disbelief. Meanwhile, the husband faced conflicting advice. Some urged him to reveal everything to the church elders. Others suggested patience, praying for a resolution that might avoid scandal. Torn between heartbreak and anger, the husband confronted his wife. She confessed in halting words, begging forgiveness and placing partial blame on the pastor's manipulative charm. He slammed a cupboard, pacing with eyes brimming with fury. Their bond, once anchored in mutual faith, cracked under the weight of betrayal. Yet even then, some thought reconciliation might be possible, if the pastor stepped down, if honest repentance came from all sides. But in a small office behind the church, the pastor fumed alone. Fear overshadowed reason. Could he continue leading sermons if word of his affair spread? Would the entire congregation condemn him, leaving him with nothing? So many illusions had carried him so far. Could desperation now push him toward an act that no confession could reverse? Meanwhile, the wife, racked by guilt, reached out to a friend, lamenting that the pastor seemed oddly unwavering. "He hasn't apologized properly," she confided, voice trembling over the phone. "He's more worried about losing his position than the harm we've done." With tensions at a fever pitch, the husband decided enough was enough. He scheduled a final meeting with the pastor to settle matters once and for all. Did he imagine they might find closure in an open confession, or had bitterness already devoured his hope of reason? If a moment of compassion might have steered them from devastation, would either man have recognized it in the throes of outrage and panic? Or was the stage set for a final confrontation that no prayer could forestall? Under a rapidly darkening sky, the husband confronted the pastor for what he believed was the last time. Their meeting, meant to resolve the festering conflict, grew intense the moment they locked eyes. Harsh words replaced any vestige of civility. The pastor, rattled by the threat of exposure, tried to regain composure, offering half-hearted apologies that did little to soothe the husband's wrath. Suddenly, the anger took a sharp turn. The husband hurled accusations that crossed every boundary of decency, branding the pastor not just an adulterer, but a manipulator who used spiritual authority to seduce a trusting wife. In turn, the pastor lashed out, claiming the husband's neglect fueled the affair. The conversation spiraled into a bitter war of words that felt impossible to de-escalate. Some accounts suggest the pastor tried one last time to calm the tension, but desperation overshadowed any rational attempt at peace. With reputations, marriages, and pastoral callings on the line, fear burst into violence. The pastor, in a burst of panic, reached for a concealed weapon. A single gunshot shattered the still night air. An agonizing silence followed. The pastor stood there, chest heaving, weapon in trembling hand, as he stared at the man who had once trusted him for spiritual guidance. In that moment, a life dedicated to preaching faith and family ended in murder. Wordless minutes passed before the pastor finally found the presence of mind to phone for help. Sirens blared soon after, lights dancing across the church walls. The deed was done, an affair laid bare, a life extinguished, and a pastor's reputation plummeting into an abyss of condemnation. Could anyone have foreseen this precise outcome? Or had every small choice guided them to a fatal collision that no apology could erase? Within minutes, the congregation's trusted leader was in handcuffs, his hands stained with the horror of what he'd done. News spread at lightning speed through the close-knit community. Many residents, startled from late dinners and quiet TV nights, stepped onto their porches to see emergency vehicles racing toward the church they'd always viewed as a sanctuary. Paramedics declared the husband deceased at the scene, the bullet's impact leaving no room for salvation. Police taped off the area, shutting down the entire parking lot, while detectives photographed the remains of a man who should have been preparing for the next Sunday's service as a simple congregant. Instead, he lay in a pool of betrayal and shattered faith. For the pastor, there was no hiding behind a polished sermon now. Faced with the literal smoking gun, he offered a frantic story of self-defense, that the victim lunged at him, that he only fired to protect himself. But initial forensics and witness statements painted a different picture, one steeped in fear, jealousy, and impending scandal. The church's side door camera, though grainy, reportedly captured enough audio to challenge his version of events. The wife, upon hearing the news, collapsed into tears, her mind whirling with guilt and sorrow. Some friends attempted to comfort her, Yet how does one console someone who watched her emotional entanglement spiral into the death of a husband at the hands of a pastor? As the night stretched on, Cedar Glen's faithful found themselves wrestling with questions few had ever imagined. How could the man who guided their souls commit a crime so brazenly at odds with everything he preached? Would any step along this twisted path have altered the outcome if someone had intervened with genuine compassion? Or had each secret and silent choice lit the fuse that ended in a pastor murdering the very soul he was meant to protect? In the interrogation room, the pastor faced a thorough examination of his hidden dealings. Detectives confronted him with mounting evidence, text messages detailing his affair, testimonies from stunned congregants who sensed the tension, and ballistic reports indicating the victim had likely been caught off guard. Each new fact cornered the pastor further. Initially, the pastor clung to the self-defense narrative. He insisted that the husband's fury posed an immediate threat, leaving him no choice but to fire. Yet cracks emerged when forensics pointed to a single shot to the chest from a distance. The pattern contradicted a close-range scuffle. Cowed by facts, the pastor's tearful composure broke, and he mumbled a wavering confession that he'd felt his entire world imploding. The affair about to be exposed, shame choking him. He offered a murky explanation. A swirl of guilt, fear, and panic triggered the bullet. Some investigators believed he intended to intimidate, never expecting it to kill. Others saw the murder as a calculated act, removing the final obstacle threatening his facade of righteousness. The pastor sobbed, repeating that he loved the victim's wife, that he didn't want this outcome. But remorse, late as it was, did nothing to resurrect the deceased man. Cedar Glen braced itself for the fallout. The congregation, once proud of their pastor, now wrestled with profound betrayal. Many demanded answers on how desire and envy warped a godly figure into a cold-blooded killer. While the pastor's tearful admissions might help investigators piece together a motive, could any reason or apology ever suffice to wash away the sin of killing a 42-year-old congregant who merely discovered an affair? Could an honest confession in earlier days have saved them all? Or was it too late the moment he chose secrecy over truth, forging a path to an irreversible tragedy that left both his faith and an innocent life destroyed? The pastor's arraignment sent shockwaves through the region. Locals who once lauded his sermons as divinely inspired now lined up for seats in the courtroom, determined to see the man they'd trusted face accountability. The victim's family attended with heavy hearts, clutching photographs of the husband who'd been proud to serve his church. Prosecutors built a formidable case. Forensic data, text transcripts of the affair, and the suspect's own confession formed a mountain of evidence pointing to premeditated murder. The defense, while conceding the affair, argued that fear of the husband's potential violence left the pastor cornered. Yet cross-examination revealed no proof the victim had been armed or intended lethal harm. Emotional testimonies from the wife, friends, and even disillusioned congregants painted a picture of a man whose moral veneer shattered under the pressure of sin exposed. The wife, distraught and guilt-ridden, sobbed as she recounted how the husband confided in her just days before his death, saying he planned a final confrontation but hoping for a path that didn't end in violence. As the trial progressed, the pastor's cold unraveling in the spotlight forced the entire congregation to reevaluate not only his sermons, but their own perceptions. Some found it difficult to reconcile the memory of his uplifting services with the brutality he'd unleashed. Others felt anger at the betrayal, convinced he manipulated the church's reverence to mask a darker side. The entire town reeled as they faced the verdict's looming weight. Would the jury see a man pushed to the brink by panic, or a murderer who sacrificed a life to save his pride? And so, with the final day of testimony nearing, the question loomed large. Could any remorse or act of penance redeem a pastor who betrayed faith, family, and an entire community? Or was the moral ground he stood upon lost forever the moment he pulled that trigger? When the jury delivered a verdict of murder, the pastor's final protestations collapsed into silent acceptance. The judge, referencing the pastor's role in the community trust he abused, issued a stern sentence. Outside, a drizzle began to fall, mingling with the tears of those who once found hope under his sermons. A mild sense of closure arrived, but it couldn't resurrect the victim or repair the wife's shattered world. In the months that followed, Cedar Glen tried to heal. A new pastor was installed, carefully chosen to restore faith in the congregation. The wife, grieving and weighed by guilt, sought counseling and community support to salvage some semblance of normalcy. The once revered man sat in a prison cell, time stretching before him as he reflected on how secrecy, pride, and moral collapse led to murder. Conversations ignited about accountability and spiritual leaders, the perils of hidden temptation, and the utter necessity of transparency. Some insisted the entire church reevaluate its systems to ensure no pastor could wield unchecked authority. Others pointed out the danger in allowing admiration of a leader to blind them to warning signs. The memory of a 42-year-old husband, once full of faith, lingered in the pews and Sunday classes, a haunting reminder of how destructive deception can become when left unchallenged. Each person in Cedar Glen carried forward pieces of this cautionary tale. For the faithful, the story underscored that not even the cloth of ministry guarantees righteousness. For skeptics, it reaffirmed the fragility of trusting those who wear a virtuous mask. And for the victim's grieving family, no measure of justice could fully restore the warmth of a husband and father stolen by betrayal. In the end, we're left to ask, if a man sworn to a holy calling can sink so swiftly from guiding souls to committing lethal sin, what does that say about the secrets we allow to brew in hidden corners of our hearts? Are we prepared to watch for those warning signs, speaking truth before silent desires flare into deadly impulses? Nothing can undo the life lost or erase the anguish of a pastor's betrayal against a trusted friend. Yet, in the ruins of this heartbreak, a solemn reminder remains. Deceit and desperation can fester wherever honesty and watchfulness are lacking. If this story has made you reflect on the fragility of trust and the weight of concealed desires, we urge you to carry this caution forward. Pay attention to loved ones, speak up when something feels off, and remember that addressing secrets openly might prevent irreversible harm. Thank you for joining True Crime Acts as we examine the twisted paths people take in the shadow of faith, passion, and lies. If you found this investigation compelling and vital, please like, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you never miss another deep look into humanity's darkest turns. Together, we can stay vigilant, fostering a world where hidden obsessions lose their power to destroy.